Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the technique capturing rod, its execution, some variations on its execution, some problems that may arise, and how to deal with those problems. So let's talk about the ideal phase. The ideal phase is against a gun to the chest. So let's talk about some variations of this ideal phase of the attack. Let's talk about the three dimensions: depth, height, and width. So let's go through them one at a time. Depth, ideal phase is against your chest, but he could be slightly further, and even slightly further, and then farther away. The idea that's going on here is the closer he is to you, the easier it is for you to get to this gun and move it away from you. Okay, the further he is, the harder it is for you to get to that gun, and to the point where you can't even reach it anymore, and then you can't even deal with it. So just keep this in mind. The ideal phase is either against your chest or slightly within your reach. Okay, so with all the depth and the height problems is we have to keep in mind that our hands are at our side, and the further he gets away from me, the further he gets away from my hands. This also works for height, which is the next dimension we'll talk about. If he gets up to my head, the technique will work, but we have to keep in mind that he's further away from my hands, but not further away from me doing other things. So just keep that in mind as you're going around dealing with variations on this attack. So now the final one is width. So in this case, modern day attacks may come in at a horizontal like this rather than the vertical by just rotating it or moving side to side. Again, keep in mind, this technique will work off that variation, just the same as the other ones. But now that we've discussed that, let's talk about going back to the standard execution attack. So let's talk about what's going on here with this gun. We have to worry about a gun only in a very small window, which is that window right there where the bullet is coming out. As opposed to, say, a stick or a knife, which a stick and knife have bigger areas to worry about. This has a very small area window, which is very dangerous, but is far more dangerous than the other two in many cases. So we've decided we have to do this technique. Most times we just go, what do you want? Hand it over, be done with it. But in this case, we feel that we must respond. Maybe because somebody else needs you, maybe because you feel they're going to shoot you. Whatever the reason may be, you've decided you have to go and deal with this gun. So how do we do that? So this is where we're going to start with this. We can do one of three things, or possible things that can be done here are: I can move the gun out of the way, I can move myself out of the way, or we can do both. So in this case, what we're going to do is both, because that's the quickest. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to turn my back to the camera so that you can see how this works to start with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move myself out of the way by doing this. Okay? So if you notice, the gun now has a direct line of sight to the camera, and I won't get shot. If I try and do stuff to this person, like move at him or move away, or even move to the side, if you notice what's happening here, it takes me a long time to get away from this barrel, or I don't get away from the barrel in time and he gets to shoot me. So what we want to do is we just want to turn away as fast as possible so that we can get away from that small area window of getting shot. But to ensure that that works, we're going to turn back this way and add the next piece. So the next piece is I'm going to move this gun out of the way. So now how do I do that? There's a very important way to do this. If I move further this way and I begin to move him out of the way, all he needs to do is turn his wrist and he can point that gun at me. Works also the same way this way. If I move it this way, he can still continue to point at me. So we have this wrist that we want to isolate. Now keep in mind, there's two ends that this could work on. It could work on this end of the wrist or this end of the wrist. So if I do push this gun far this way, he can continue to point at me, or he can go back the other way and continue to point at me, or depth-wise he can continue to point at me. So we have to worry about isolating this. So there's a sweet spot that goes about this far above, about halfway to the gun, to where we can really start controlling this weapon and not having to worry about this wrist taking advantage of us. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit right about at the sweet spot in the gun, not too far forward, not too far away. And then what we're going to do is we're going to step forward with our right hand, and then we're going to actually control the gun. We'll get into that in just a minute, so that we're going to have two hands on this. Even though we're breaking the rule 2 to 1, this is an exception to that rule because it's far more important to control this weapon than it is and not get shot than it is to try and obey a rule of 2 to 1. And we're going to do some things to compensate for that. So, what we're going to do is we're going to divert the weapon, then what we're going to do is we're going to take their mind off the weapon. So how are we going to do that? So what we're going to do is we're going to hit them in the eyes or slice them in the eyes, but we're going to do it as fast as possible. Normally when we do this, this is another rule or break, what we want to do is we want to turn the hand over to get a brace angle for this middle finger and then slice the eye. But what we're going to do is obey speed over that rule. So what we want to do is go right from point of origin, hit them right in the eye, and then grab the gun. So all we're doing is expanding the circle a little bit to hit them. Keep in mind, in order to turn offenses into defenses, we contract circles. In order to turn defenses into offenses, we expand the circle. So if we need to just grab this really quick, we contract our circle. If we want to turn it into an offense, then a defense, we expand the circle. So what we're going to do for the ideal phase is to expand that circle to hit them. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And we're going to go as fast as possible by not turning it over because it adds more complexity to it. So what we want to do is make it as simple as possible, expand that circle sliced, and then turn this immediately into a grab. One of the problems that may arise is you begin to float and do this. What you want to do is settle right into your stance because we're going to obey rule number 1, get into a stable base because you might be in a fight here. If I'm beginning to float, there's a possibility that he can take advantage of the fact that I'm not creating a stable base as fast as possible. Same thing as this, slicing as fast as possible, we're going to establish our base as fast as possible so that we expect to be in a fight with this person very quickly. Okay, so keep that in mind. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn sideways with my back towards the camera again so you can see what's going to happen here. I'm going to do this, and if you notice, I get it out of the way as fast as possible, I get control, and I grab this gun. So now what's happening here? So watch what I just did. What I want to do is as I come across, I want to grab, I want to get my hand, palm down on top of this, and I want to pin their hand to that gun. So we're both grabbing the gun at this point. If they do have their finger on the trigger, that's okay. We're pinning it to the trigger. They could continue to shoot if they wish, but we don't have to worry about them fighting with this and trying to take control of it because we do have our hand on the gun and both of us are now in a fight, but I have 2 to 1 on the gun, which gives me a slight advantage. So I don't want to over-rotate and I don't want to unanchor my elbow because that begins to create pass lines. So let's talk through that right now. So as I begin to come across here for the grab, I want to anchor my elbow this way and I want to drop into my stance after I do my slice. So now if we're in a fight here, I actually have more control of this weapon than the opponent does. If I begin to unanchor my elbow, I start giving them more and more control over that gun. So one of the things we want to be able to do is turn, anchor, and grab that gun immediately. So now another thing that we do in Kenpo is we have the normal version of the technique, which is what we generally call the long version. Then there are slightly shorter versions. In this case, what we're going to do is show you a really quick version that you can do to get in and out as fast as you need to because, like we said, you might be doing this for a very specific reason that requires you to get in and out immediately. So this version, what it does is it goes straight in, does the slice, the grab, and immediately pulls out. Okay? So if you notice, what we were talking about earlier was that index finger. If that index finger is in that trigger and I begin to pull, not only am I going to shoot the gun, but I'm going to break off the finger too. So keep that in mind. So now there's one other thing that you can do. We're going to turn around 180 degrees so you can see it, is defense for myself. What I can do is I can take my finger as I do this, and I can bring it into my eardrum, so I can save my eardrum on the shooting of the gun, because this gun is right close to your ear, and you can do that. If you want to, you could also stick your thumb in, but most people like sticking their index finger in. So what you would do is you would just stop, stick that finger in, immediately pull out. Now you have control of the gun, you've broken their shooting finger, and you're in and out as fast as possible. So let's turn back around. But what we are going to do in this is stick to the ideal phase. Just keep that in mind. Kenpo has different lengths of techniques. The reason why we generally do the longer technique for the ideal phase is so that you can learn specific rules and principles that we're trying to teach you in this. So for instance, in this case, one of the things that it's teaching you is the fact that once you get this gun away from you, you want to keep it away from you. So one of the problems that may occur is, I get into here, I do this all really good, and I begin to poke him in the eye, which is the next motion, and look at what's happening to this gun. It's getting closer and closer to my face. Or we even go further, and I begin to try and get the gun away from him, and you can see that the gun's pointing at me. You never want to do that. What you want to do is, once you get this gun diverted, you want that gun pointed to a safe area, usually up or towards them, to where if it does shoot, it's going to shoot them rather than you. So keep that in mind as we continue to go forward through this. This gun should always be pointing to a safe area away from you, or at the opponent, so that they shoot themselves. Okay? So let's get up to that point again. You do the settle and the slice, anchoring that elbow. Next thing we're going to do is a finger poke to get control of that gun again. And then what we're going to do is rotate slightly this way to get their wrist vertical. We have wrist locks that do straight back and forward like this way or this way. What we're now going to do is we're going to do the side wrist lock. And what we're going to do is let that gun we're going to take advantage of the fact that they're holding that gun now, so that as we begin to apply pressure to that gun, that's what's going to happen. What I did here is, remember, we're grabbing and we're pinning their fingers to that gun. And as I begin to apply pressure to it, that applies pressure not only to the fingers, but also to that wrist. And then make sure we have it, we're going to maintain that 2-to-1, and then we're going to crank that down, and they're going to fall right to the ground. The problem here is, again, make sure you don't do this. Make sure you keep it pointing up. Plus, the higher you get it up, the more vertical you get it, and the more pressure you can apply to that. Okay? So let's take it up to that point. So we get to here, do the poke, get that vertical alignment, and drop them down. Notice where that gun is pointing, and I push and pull it with this, extract that gun, then slam forward and hit him with the gun. Then what I want to do is get better control of this gun as I begin to gauge. You can gauge however you see fit, but notice what's happening here. No matter what I'm doing, as I walk around, I want to keep that barrel pointing directly at my opponent. And then we have to worry about what's going on with the left hand. If we do things, we never want to get that hand in front of that barrel. What we want to do is keep that hand away from that barrel, so that this is always pointing at the opponent, and we never get any of our body in front of it, even if we need to switch hands. Okay? So one more quick walkthrough. Move both ourselves and the opponent. We do it by rotating. Make sure we get within this sweet spot. Don't rotate over as we begin to slice the eyes. Also set into a stance, don't float. Once we get through there, we get to grab with the palm down, get control of the weapon, anchor your elbow. Make sure you don't unanchor your elbow so that you create a pass line. Once we get this gun away from ourselves, make sure it stays away from ourselves. Once we've gotten that, you push and pull, push into the eyes, get that poke, turn this vertical, drop them down, make sure again, this stays up, not at you. Push, pull, set into the face with that, cross out and cover, creating our gauge, whatever we need to do. Now we're going to do this slightly faster. If you want to see somebody actually trying to shoot this, because you don't believe it might not work for this, we do have a video where all we do is we execute the technique. We're using this exact same gun, and it does shoot rubber bullets, and that you'll be able to see that this person doesn't know exactly when I'm going to do it, so which simulates real life, you'll notice that the bullet doesn't even get close to hitting the person that's executing the technique. So in this case, we're going to do it one more time so that you can see it. Not very fast, but slightly faster than what we've been talking about. Up. Hope this video helps you. Thank you very much.